Welcome back in to David L. Gray, Off Code and Unscripted. Got one thing for you today. I gotta eulogize Church Militant, St. Michael's Media, not Michael Voris. So I've heard from a few different sources that this may be the last week that Church Militant is going to be in existence as we know it. So I hope that's not true, or I hope a miracle happens and they're able to right this ship. I really do. But in anticipating the worst, I know there's going to be a lot of ink, a lot of consonants, vowels, and syllables spilled over the coming month, maybe. That's going to be quite negative. So I wanted to come in first and say something positive about the impact that Church Militant had on Catholicism, how the space that they occupy for so long is not going to be filled by anyone, at least anytime soon, and that's going to hurt us. So that's what I want to talk about. I'll eventually start the clock, but I need to get to a few things first. But this is Off Code and Unscripted with David L. Gray. Let's get into it now. I do need to say this one thing, because sometimes I get pushback from people who only see like some videos that like challenge the Kool-Aid, because the YouTube algorithm likes to put out a certain type of content of mine and not put out the other type of content. So sometimes all what people see is sometimes when I'm being critical, right? My videos where I'm being a critic of this thing or that thing, or sometimes even that person. So last week I put out a few videos about some, the content was, challenging the Kool-Aid, as I say, that people drink. And there were some weird comments I noticed that people made. One person was saying, "Oh, David, you're putting out content. It's just, all you're doing is putting out social justice content." I have no idea where that came from. One person said, "Oh, David, you don't like anybody whose name isn't David L. Gray." Listen. Okay. So what do we do at St. Dominic's Media, actually? These off-code and unscripted podcasts, that's something I kind of do just to fill the blanks, fill the space. Because I know it gets attention, it gets clicks, or whatever. And that draws people to our other content, or draws subs in, right? So I'm just working the algorithm, but also challenging some conventional wisdom that sometimes I think is off, or presenting an idea or a thought that I think may expand the way we think about things and sort of get us out of our camps and our cults, because I think that's important. But for those who don't know, right, what do we actually do at St. Dominic's Media? Well, there's a few things I would point to. One, our weekly podcast called The Liturgical Sense of the Readings at Mass. That's the liturgical sense of the readings at Mass. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast. And you can also find it at YouTube. You can find it at St. Dominic's Media. You can sign up for our newsletter, get it in your email. Every week we release it. So the Liturgical Sense of the Readings at Mass is a podcast that breaks down the readings at Mass from what method I developed called the liturgical sense. So this sense of reading the scriptures is, well, I guess just how it sounds. We read the scriptures through the lenses of the liturgy, and we're looking at the scriptures. Okay, what does this say about the Mass? Okay, because no one becomes a saint merely by going or worshiping at the Mass. No. Why? Because at the Mass, we're not autonomous, so to speak. We're not using our frontal lobe and our decision-making process, so to speak. What we're doing is merely just saying what the church has asked us to say, doing what the church is telling us to do at the moment: stand, kneel, sit, sing, chant, whatever. Why? Because the liturgy, this method is pedagogical. So it's teaching us through repetition how to be in the world. So it's in the world, after we're dismissed from the liturgy, that we become saints, because we're using our decision-making processes, our Catholic conscience. So that's where we become saints. That's where we become holy, by taking out of the Mass what we learned there into the world. Right. So what we're doing at St. Dominic's Media was we're instructing people, how do you do that? Because that's how you become a saint. So that's one podcast. And related to that is the podcast that we're doing that is really more like a study on the Catechism of the Catholic Church in 31 lessons. We're on lesson 15 now. That should be coming out this week. And what that is doing is, again, well, it's not so much what Father Mike Schmidt was doing over at Ascension Press. He's going to talk about the catechism or whatever for a year. It's not that. Because, again, we're taking what the church teaches and we're explaining how do you live that in the world. Also, what is there in the liturgy to help you really form you in obeying that teaching? What virtue is that teaching attached to? So here's a catechism. This is how you live it in the world. That's what we're doing at St. Dominic's Media. So that's another podcast you get anywhere you get your podcast, or go to St. Dominic's Media. It's also here on YouTube. YouTube algorithm does not push it out a whole lot. We have a lot of courses over at St. Dominic's Media as well. One course or lesson this would be that we're working on now, because it's just going to be one part. It is about memory, the role of memory in salvation history, right? How was memory wounded at the fall? And what has God been doing throughout salvation history to heal our memory? Because what happened, well, it would have been good for us to have memory or knowledge of just the good. We would only know virtue. We would only remember virtuous things, and we repeat them. But what happened, when Eve wanted to know knowledge of evil, well, then she got memory of evil, knowledge of evil. And this memory and knowledge of evil, and that's what makes us sin again, or sin the first time. We have the memory of it. Remember how good that felt. So we want to repeat it. This is why we sin, why we fall into temptation. We have knowledge of a thing that is sinful. And that's really associated with memory, that knowledge. And so we want to do it. And so what God has been doing throughout salvation history, he's been trying to heal our memory by, again, over and over again, telling us, remember me. Remember me. Remember what I did. And so he's been pointing to himself. And so it's an amazing teaching that I'll be releasing on that. So studies and lessons like that you can find at St. Dominic's Media. You can find it here on YouTube, but the algorithm doesn't really push them out. One thing that we have coming up in 2025, I think amazing, we're going to have a pilgrimage that's going to be going through Spain and France. As Dominicans, as hounds of heaven, we're going to follow St. Dominic, where he is born, where he studied, where he lived, where he's baptized. We're going to walk the El Camino way. We're going to be in Lourdes, Madrid, Toulouse. It's going to be a phenomenal 12-day pilgrimage. And it's going to be a pilgrimage like no other. One, I'm going to be giving, during pilgrimage, I'm giving like 4 talks on Dominican spirituality from a lay perspective. How do you live Dominican spirituality? How does Dominican spirituality connect with liturgy? Why is it the best spirituality? I think that's the best path to sainthood, because it integrates so well into the liturgical life. I'll be giving 4 talks on that. One of the pillars of Dominican spirituality is community. So this isn't just a pilgrimage. This is building community. After the pilgrimage is over, we're going to stay in touch. We're going to have community. We're going to get together online. We're going to do this every 2 to 3 years. It's going to be, nothing has ever come like this, a pilgrimage like this, connected to Dominican spirituality. Ellen Steve LeBlanc, who's been on this show, she's helping put together the pilgrimage. And we're still working on which bishop will be with us on the pilgrimage to offer mass, hear confessions. We have some deacons confirmed. Harold Burke Sivers, he's coming. Deacon Christopher Major of San Francisco, he'll be there. We're trying to book like at least 3 buses. So this is going to be epic. Again, this is going to be September 2025. Sign up for our newsletter, St. Dominic's Media, for more information about it. We should have everything wrapped up in March. So I'm going to start pushing that really heavy. So, no, off-code and unscripted. David sometimes being critical of the social conditions of sometimes I'm critiquing the critique, right? This little critique podcast is not the bulk of our work. We're actually doing a work that really, I think, is really about saint building. The best way we think we can build saints, and that's through teaching people the real meaning of the liturgy. So I hope that was more insightful. And so you're going to try to pigeonhole the work into just this. Next. So one more thing before I start the clock about why I'm doing this video, because like I said, I think I think this week, in the coming weeks, there's going to be a lot of what I call 2020 or the hindsight sort of thing. Looking back and really seeing, oh man, this where Church Militant, St. Michael's Media messed up. This is what Michael did. Michael Voris. Going to be a lot of commentary making this all about him. Okay, I think there's a space for that. Right? I'm not saying that content is going to be dumb. I think there's a space for that. Okay, but what I'm doing here is something different. I'm going to be looking at the positive, which I don't think a lot of people are going to do. I was talking to my friend Bobby Hesley, some of you know, and he's offering me some insightful 2020 stuff I hadn't really thought about, and I thought that was legitimate. I think there's a lot to look back and say, man, this is where things went wrong. It wasn't just the past 3 or 4 years. It's maybe this started way back when. Okay, and there's some things that's related to Catholic social teaching that people should have caught. Fine. I was also speaking with my friend Christine Harrington, from the Eternal Life Plan, her podcast, phenomenal podcast she has. Subscribe to her. Because I don't think Bobby's going to make a video. He really doesn't make videos anymore. But Christine probably will. She's really been on top of this. Some really insightful content. And she's been kind of thoughtful about things. She's tried to get eyewitness testimony. So that's fine. And, she had some thoughts about when things started going bad. Here's the point where things could have changed. But, again, for whatever reasons, it didn't happen. I think that's a phenomenal take, right? So, and I think there's space for that. Okay. I will say this, though, and this has really been my critique of people who critique the Catholic Church. Again, my critique of the critique is that the Catholic Church is the only institution on the face of this earth where people judge us by our bad members. They'll judge us by, the pre-scandal, the sexual abuse, even though we found out about that over 2 decades ago, over 2 decades ago. You're still here today, right? We get judged by our bad actors. Long before that, we're getting judged by Galileo or the Crusades or the so-called Protestant Reformation or the Eastern Orthodox Catholics judging us by the Crusades. We always get judged by our bad. People judge us by Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi. We're the only institution to get judged by the bad, all right, which is the wrong way to judge Catholicism. The only way to judge Catholicism is not by our people who didn't obey church teaching, but by those who did obey it. The only way to judge Catholicism is by our saints, but no one does that. No one judges us by the members we actually have in heaven. I think that's demonic. But sometimes we as Catholics, we get caught up in that as well, right? We judge some of what we do by our bad actors, right? Again, some of it may be a legitimate critique. I'm not saying that. But there has to also be space, I think, for us to look at the good, right? Sometimes I text Michael Voris or he texts me. He's in rehab now. And one thing I had sent him recently a message was I was just reflecting on my past, right? In my late 20s, early 30s, I was not a great person at all. Long before I even knew Jesus Christ as a real person, right? And that's really what changed me. That encounter I had with Christ. But so, man, a lot of bad frontal lobe decisions, right? And which led me eventually to prison. Yeah, a completely unforced error. I had no business making those type of decisions, no reason to. But I did. And so I went to prison about 5 years. And I remember about 2.5 years in, I get a letter from my wife at the time. And she's ready to get a divorce. And a part of me got it, right? She's lonely. In prison, time sort of freezes. But people outside, man, you're paying bills, you're living, she's raising our daughters. I get it, right? I get it. But what hurt me the most in prison was the fact that I was a completely different person than who she had married. And all I wanted was to show her who I was now. Right, not just at these visits. She'd come to visit me with the girls often, right? But she really didn't see me, who I was becoming, who the Catholic Church, studying church teaching, what I now knew about manhood and fatherhood, what I knew about life, fidelity, like everything, the person I was becoming. I just wanted to show her that man. I want to show her that husband, and I want to show her that father. All right. And it sucked that I wasn't going to be able to have a chance to, because, women, once women, they make a decision that they're done, right? There's songs that talk about that, like when a woman's fed up, right? It's just over, and there's nothing you can do to change that, though I tried my best. And I remember, man, at nighttime, I would just want to get into a time machine. That's what I told Michael, that I used to want to just get into a time machine and go back. And that time machine never, ever, ever showed up. It just never did. And I had to just learn how to live in the present. I just had to accept it. And it took a long time to learn how to live in the present. Sometimes you ever like been to a bathroom and you take a dump and the toilet doesn't flush? What do you do? What do you do, right? You keep trying to flush it, hope nobody comes in behind you, right? Close the lid. I don't know. Spray something. What do you do, right? Sometimes there's some crap that we put out as human beings that's just going to like stay there, right? Until it dissolves or something like that. And there's nothing you could do, man. There's nothing you have to just live with it. Live with what you did. Live with the fact that some people are going to smell what you did. Some people might step in it, right? It's just, that's the human condition. Okay, and that's more of what I'll be talking about in my lesson on memory. But that's what I told Michael. And so that's kind of what I want to do in this talk. I'm about to start the clock. I want to just like kind of talk about what Church Militant, the good that they did. Right? I'm not going to focus on the crap in the toilet. Right? I'm just going to kind of talk about what they did that was good and why they'll be sorely missed. So let's start the clock now. So Church Militant started, real Catholic TV, early 2000s, right? I think I started watching them about 2010, 2011. They were still doing some apologetics. They were still doing some news. None of that, I don't think we're going to miss. I think there's people out there right now in the Catholic social media space who does apologetics better than real Catholic TV or Church Militant did. I think there's people who do social commentary as well as Church Militant ever did. Maybe even some better. I don't know. And there's new Catholic news. Anybody could do that, right? That's not going to be missed. I think what's going to be missed, I think what Church Militant did really well was what I call the even critique. And again, just to comment on Michael Voris, I get why people want to make the two synonymous. I get how domineering his personality was. I understand how the fall happened, right? I think there's been a lot of bad CEOs, and they fall, and the organization keeps continuing. But maybe Michael Voris is so integral in what Church Militant was doing, it couldn't sustain, right? So I get that. So I'm not trying to put so much distance Michael Voris from the organization, because I think it's the communicado of idioms, right? When you speak of one, I think you can also almost speak of the other. But Church Militant, I guess, along with him, right? One thing they did well was the even critique. The even critique. And that's something that is sorely missing in the Catholic social media space anyway. But on such a large national, international platform that they were doing, there's no one out there that does it. What is the even critique? Right? The even critique is being able to call balls and strikes evenly, as well as you can. Right? I like to consider myself center right. Right? And I think that's why I get a lot of haters. I think that's why Church Militant also get a lot of what I call haters, right? Because the Catholic space, you have, at least in the social media space and in media space, you have a lot of people who are like far left. And a lot of people are just like far right, right? We'll call them liberals, we'll call them traditionalists, right? Who thinks their way is the only way. There aren't a whole lot of people. I think most Catholics are in the center, right? I think a lot are center left, a lot, some are center right. But as far as the media space goes, there's very few that are like right there, like center right, where I think Catholicism is on a lot of issues. And so I think largely they were able to call balls and strikes on both sides, right? Whether it's traditionalists, whether it's liberals, whether it's SSPX, whether it was, the Church of Nice, as they called it, right? They were able to call balls and strikes evenly, and without holding back criticism. So I think that was, I think that is one thing that we'll miss in this space. That type of organization with that large of a platform being able to look at both sides and say, hey, this is wrong over here, this is wrong over here, and sort of carve out a path forward, right? So I think they did that really well. And the Kool-Aid drinkers, as I call them, because I think we do have a whole lot of Kool-Aid drinkers in the Catholic Church. People who drunk the Kool-Aid over here of the church of the bare minimum. They don't ask much of us. Don't fast so much. Let's move our Sunday masses to Thursday. That whole, it's just, they don't ask much of us. They just think, hey, let's have a Eucharistic revival. That'll fix stuff. It's a weird way that we operate, right? Of not really doing much to make people saints, right? And then you have people on the other side who drank the Kool-Aid of traditionalism. I think Church Militant was there for a moment. They would say, oh, you just get to a traditional like mass. That's how Michael used to end every video. And, he outgrew that because he realized there was a lot of pansies wearing pink underwear, pink panties underneath their cassock over here, right? Everything isn't, right? And, I always see a lot of people in my comments, saying, oh, you just got to go back to tradition. And like I said, my series, it's a return to sacred. The reason why you return to sacred, not tradition, because you have to ask yourself, what traditions? The tradition when Black people received communion last, the tradition where you didn't wear the color black to mass, the tradition where men sat over here, women's. Which traditions? Not all traditions are sacred, not all traditions are holy. So it's not return to tradition, it's return to sacred. But you have the people who drank the Kool-Aid, and they just think, hey, we just have James Martin do the traditional Latin mass, everything will be fixed. No, it's not that. In Church Militant, they got that after Michael and them, they outgrew this idea. All right. Remember when Church Militant, they wouldn't even critique Pope Francis, and I was upset with them about that. I even talked to Michael about that when we had dinner one time, and I think looking back, I think he understands. Oh, maybe I should have said something sooner. Like when a lot of us knew that this guy's a bad pope, perhaps the worst pope in the history of popedom. Church Militant wasn't saying anything critical about the Pope himself, about Francis. And, looking back now, looking at where the Catholic social media space is now, in some of the vicious language that we use about Pope Francis, even sometimes now, I'm like, hey, so I think it's admirable looking back how long they resisted speaking about Pope Francis personally, because maybe we went too far sometimes now about some of the things that we say about him personally. Okay. I'm looking at some of the people in our Catholic social media space who have spoken very ill of the Pope personally, and I'm looking at some things that are going on in their life now. Some of the things that happens to their ministry, right? Kind of maybe this stuff is connected, right? There's, in a Catholic social media space, again, the whole even critique. I think there are some organizations that's maybe bigger, than Church Militant St. Michael's Media was, and just an organization, and maybe some that have more reach or equal reach in the social media space. But again, I think they're either too far left or too far right to really be taken seriously, or to have the type of impact that I think Church Militant was able to have, because they largely had an even critique. For example, National Catholic Register, right? Their problem, I think, it's a good organization, even though I call it as, a plant for the CIA operation. They're just too close to the bishops, right? EWTN, National Catholic Register, just too close to the bishops. On the other side, National Catholic Reporter, just too far left. They're completely into the Skittlemania. LifeSite News, they do some great reporting like Church Militant, but again, like, will they call strikes on the SSPX, right? I don't know. Right? I think they're too far into to recognize and resist, okay, to be taken seriously. You share a LifeSite News with a leftist, they sort of laughed, right? So I don't know. The Remnant, right? Michael Matt, too far, right? In the Catholic Identity Conference, I think the Catholic space is going to miss Church Militant for that reason. There's no one in this space right now that is large as them, that has as much reach as them, that can occupy that space. And I think that's really their major contribution, because of that, because they were able to occupy that space sort of in the center right, bishops feared them. Bishops feared Church Militant and tried to take them down a lot, right? Constantly attacked by the bishops. And because they were who they were, Church Militant, St. Michael's Media, they were the only organization that was able to hold the bishops accountable. Not with these petitions that we see LifeSite News doing all the time, and Catholic Vote, I think, does them. Because these are just harvesting emails. Petitions don't do anything. But actually with boots on the ground, Church Militant was able to do that, to hold the bishops accountable. No one else can have the type of platform that can call people to Baltimore as they did, and have that No More Something conference. I forget what was the actual name, but I spoke at it. That was a few years ago. And no one has the cachet, and no one has the resources to be able to pull something off like that. They held the bishops accountable. At least they tried. The bishops, the episcopacy, the episcoporum is not accountable to anyone. The papacy is not accountable to anyone. Let's be honest about that. But I think, especially us. But I think Church Militant did their best to try to put pressure on them to make them accountable. I think some ways it worked. In a lot of ways, okay? All the wonderful work they did exposing the Skittle activity in the church, the homosexuality. Again, there's space for hypocrisy if we want to go there. Sure. There's space for that. But we're just talking about the good they did. And just looking at it on the self. That was amazing, all the exposing of the gay bishops that they did, the gay seminaries. No one else was doing that. And the platform in which they did it was huge, and that was good, and they needed to be given credit for what they did all those years. And again, with the boots on the ground, they actually had, I forget what it was called, but they had like this resist thing. They had like local chapters in cities. They had mobilized people to do stuff, right? I really didn't disagree when Michael went into the political thing. I really didn't. I think that was kind of worldly and stuff like that. Because I don't vote. Because I don't buy into the sacraments of voting. I think that changes my life. And I understand why people would disagree. I understand people, you're probably saying, "Oh, Dave, you got to vote locally." They have friends who tell me that. I get that critique. All right. But it's not. I reject that sacrament. I do, of voting. I want to change lives by teaching people how to lead a liturgy, and that's how I want to affect the public space. That's me. You don't have to do what I'm doing, right? and I don't have to do what you're doing, right? Because our call is not to, there's no teaching to say you have to go vote, but we have to participate in the space. And how I participate in the space is by teaching people how to live that thing out, the liturgy, right? So I wasn't with him when he got really into politics, church militant, really got into the whole political thing. But I thought it was amazing how they mobilized boots on the ground. There's no one who's doing that nationally now, and I don't see it coming soon with that large of a platform, that huge of a pool. All right. They need to be given credit for that. One thing else they need to be given credit for is one thing that's always been near and dear to me as a person who is a human first, right? Who's a Catholic second, and everything else is formed by that: husband, father, friend. Everything else is formed by that. But along the way, people identify me as saying, hey, you're black, right? That's how we, that racist term. Some things we use. So I accept that on a sense that, okay, there's these people there's Catholics, traditional Catholics who are, this, what do you call it? The social construct, right, of black, because there's only one human race. There's just other social constructs, right? Is black. So Church Militant was the only platform of its size and reach that Michael and Church Militant went out of their way to promote traditional Catholics who are black. Whether it's having me on their show or speaking at their conferences, or Bobby Hesley, there's been others, politicians who are black. My friend Jackson Pinckney, just so many others. No one's doing that. And I think that's a need, a huge need. Because again, we talked about this in another show. I don't believe in forced diversity. I don't. But I do think that it matters when people can identify with people, even on basic levels. And I think the Blessed Mother Mary gets this as well. It can be a basic level, just skin color. She appears Our Lady Cahibo, Our Lady Guadalupe. Hey, I look like you. Right? I relate to you. You can relate to me just on this basic level of culture, skin color, whatever. And I think that matters. So, but Church Militant was the only platform of a size and its reach looking for Catholics who are traditional and black to say, hey, we're here. And hey, this is why you should, if you're a Catholic who's black, look into tradition or look into conservatism, why liberalism has failed you. He was the only person that, I was on the show a few times, Bobby Hesley. We talked about this. I'll link some of the episodes below where we critiqued what's going on in the Democratic Party, how it harmed blacks. We talked about traditional Catholicism. So no one else is doing that. You ever seen a black person at the Catholic Identity Conference? No. LifeSite News. I've never seen. Maybe back in the day, I think you had like a Black Protestant or something like that. National Catholic EWTN. I think they have the regular people. Like Deacon and stuff like that. I had my radio show at Guadalupe Radio Network, was EWTN affiliate. Joe McClain brought me there. I think where he's at now, Stations of the Cross or something like that. He has Jordan Pacheco over there doing something. That's more local, but it's needed. So again, the point is you don't have anyone doing what Michael Voris did, showing the diversity of Catholicism and reaching out to people, Black Americans, who say, hey, consider Catholicism. Here are some people who you may identify with. No one's doing that, and that's going to be missed. The only platform that was speaking about Freemasonry, when he had me on there, I think he had someone else on there speaking. He done many shows himself about the dangers of Freemasonry. No one else is doing that. I think LifeSite News has a writer on their platform who I like. He was never a Freemason, but he's one of the few people who's not a Freemason who actually speaks about Freemasonry accurately. So they do write about it, right? Coalition for Council Priests was another platform which is large. That I spoke there about Freemasonry. Grace Force, they've had me on there. So you do have some platforms that are kind of large that do say, hey, Catholicism in America just isn't just lily white, right? And there are some issues, some taboo issues that we can talk about, like Freemasonry, But how Church Militant did it, how large they were, and they still did it, is going to be sorely missed, right? So they have to be given credit for that. And that's just really my thoughts. I can go on and on about the positive things they did, but I know I'm already way over time. It's supposed to be a 10-minute thing here. Got carried away. But, yeah, so this is the eulogy, though. And as I like to give eulogies, like I gave my own father's eulogy, I just want to highlight the positive. Because of memory. Like, God wants us to remember the good. He wants us to remember the virtue. He wants us to remember those things that lead us to holiness. He wants us to remember Him. Just remember me. Remember me. Do this in memory of me. Remember I've done for you. Right? And so we can also apply that to the human condition. We can remember the good. And there'll be people that come along that will remind us of the bad. That's fine. But for now, give me this space here just to speak about the good. Because I think it's worthwhile for us to remember the good that Church Militant brought for the time that they brought it. And I do hope there's a miracle that comes along that can keep them in their form. And I do hope there's an organization that comes along that maybe can eventually fill that space. I do. But that's all I know about that for now. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below about the good that Church Militant brought. How it impacted your life. When did you find them? And I just want to hear the good. All right? Let's make this a proper eulogy. And that's all for now. This is David O'Gray off Code, Unscripted. Remember, Jesus loves you and is there for you. Live your life like salvation matters, because that's all that does. I'm out.